Okay, welcome back to the Investigative Journal on this January 16th, 2015 day on our calendar. I'm your host, Greg Anthony. You're listening to FirstAmendmentRadio.com, and you can catch my show every evening from 6 p.m. to 7 p.m. That's on FirstAmendmentRadio.com. Today I promised I was going to get back to the Tony Alamo story. Tony Alamo is a minister that sits in jail for 175 years for essentially criticizing the Vatican for over 40 years. Now, in my quest to get to the truth of this story, I've learned many things about that ministry, as well as many things about those who either agree with Alamo's sentence or disagree. And the one thing I have come up with is that the state, in this case, and the Vatican, were fed up with him. And they were tired of him and all the language that he used throughout the years of criticizing and talking about the real deception of the Roman Catholic hierarchy. And what I also found out was that many who really believed in what he was saying jumped off the bandwagon when the state got involved with this, what I called a kangaroo trial. However, many people in the ministry believed him because they knew him. But in the outside world, it was pretty simple for the mainstream people to just drop, to listen to the nightly news. I mean, this story about a ministry, in comparison to the Vatican, it is like a fly on an elephant in size, even though the Vatican state is small. There's only 842 citizens in it, and it's about as big as a football field. I'll get into that later. But the point I'm trying to make is this story was smeared all over. The press, 150 news outlets, TV stations, and all the big channels covered it, and boy, the guy was convicted even before he had an opportunity to defend himself. And in this case, they didn't attack him by stating, well, you know, the Tony Alamo ministry has gone overboard with the freedom of speech, and we're going to attack them as far, you know, if you violate freedom of speech, what is your what's the recourse that that people have? Well, they have civil cases. You can file defamation of character in civil courts, etc. But that's not what they did. Of course not. They had to find charges, criminal charges, against him, labeling this group as a cult, which is false to begin with, calling it a compound, which is really putting a bad taste in everybody's mouth about really what this church was all about. And thirdly, if you look, see, we're even people that were Christians at this point, that followed him, jumped off the bandwagon, was on the allegations of the 4 or 5 young women that were there. But when you checked out each allegation, you will find there was coercion, there was lying, there was deceit, and even these charges fell short of any type of criminal conviction. And thus he was framed and railroaded and then spends 175 years in jail. Now, the point I'm trying to make is, he was put there primarily for criticizing Rome. And secondly, I'm going to show you some of the things he said, because I am convinced that if he would have not done this, the powers that be would have let him continue doing exactly what he's doing. That is the point, in fact, I'm going to try to make today regarding freedom of speech in this country, as well as a recent article from Pope Francis that'll explain and show you the hypocrisy of the Vatican, its leaders, and also the American government. Now, here's some of the words that Tony said, and I always preface his words by stating this. I say, listen, understand that Rome and the Vatican is not strictly a religion. They are first and foremost a state, a political entity, and a deceptive and killing machine. And they use a religion to cover it. And so the remarks that I make on this show, and the remarks that many people make when they understand this, is not criticizing. For example, I grew up a Catholic, and is not criticizing the Catholic people for their belief system. I'm not even criticizing the Pope for his belief system. I criticize the Pope for deceiving because he really, through the signs and symbols of his organization, does not worship the Christian God. And they won't tell you that. They do in their signs and symbols, but somehow, they kind of deceive you in their words. That's what I'm talking about. So when Tony was talking, he was talking about the Vatican as a city-state, as a country. Now, you know as well as I do that we're in America, the freedoms of speech do not limit someone from criticizing their government. And studying law and being a law school graduate, and a journalist, one of my prime interests was the First Amendment and cases regarding the First Amendment, and I studied it in depth. And I can tell you this, that when I read you this Pope's article, you're going to see the hypocrisy, and you're going to see and understand one more little reason why I believe this man was framed. Now, you may disagree with his Bible interpretations, and I always say this, there are many, many interpretations, and I believe that many people have different views of what that Bible has to say. So, we're going to leave that aside. But here's what he said in his exact words, and you may find this interesting. He wrote this, I believe, I'm going to get the date in a minute. I think I'll get you to the date, but it was Rome, he says, has always claimed temporal power and desired to rule over the kings and princes of the earth. Now, I'm going to add this. When you do a study of factual history about their involvement, not religiously, not spiritually, but as far as being a temporal power, you will see that the criticism is not because of their chosen religion. It is because of their actions as a secular warring entity, using their temporal power and using countries to do their dirty work. And you don't have to look any farther than a lot what goes on in today's world. Look at Rwanda in the 90s. Look at what goes on in the Philippines. And the Pope just made a visit there. I'm telling you, some letters that came out of that were interesting. Now, Tony says, in order to accomplish this end, Rome has left no means unused to obtain wealth and influence over politicians. Rome uses its influence over politicians to create war and rumors of war by creating disasters through the actions of people who do not appear to be connected to Rome. Rome who masterminds the abominations and instructs the politicians to do so. And then he gives you a Bible, to do such evil, and he gives you a Bible verse, Revelation 17:5. Now, I see criticism here getting a little bit deeper than just saying, listen, I don't really like Fatima. And all, I do a lot on that. The lies that are behind the Virgin Mary. And basically, I don't care if people believe in the Virgin Mary, but I care about setting up institutions that build people out of money. And you know the people I've had on my show. And maybe I should do one again on, I tell you what, on Medjugorje. The story there is incredible. Now, he says these truthful statements have been made for centuries by millions of Vatican defectors, including priests, nuns, and laity, from what they call the wicked and demonic Vatican. Okay. Now, I have called, many times I've said that if you look at the signs and symbols of Rome and the Vatican, just start out with the obelisk, and then you start really looking at the garb that these priests wear. It is all a pagan. Now, when you ask them these questions, what about the Black Mass? I mean, there are so many things that they do that are hypocritical. Now, is that wrong in stating that? in telling people? Why does the Pope walk around with an upside down cross? And what does that mean? What is the mitre hat really about? And you can go on and on when you start looking at these symbols. Look at what's on top of our Capitol building. Look at the true story of the Statue of Liberty. Look at even the word ISIS that I talked to you about. And understand what ISIS is and why these obelisks are here. Do you think an obelisk should represent the freedom of the United States? Come on. And do you think an obelisk sitting in St. Peter's Square should be the first thing that Christians see? When it is actually the penis of Osiris worshipped by ISIS? That's where it came from. An Egyptian myth of their gods. Now, why is it sitting in a Vatican Square? Now, some people say, well, it was a gift. Well, you know what? What if you are a small pastor of a Christian church, and that's your belief system, and everybody has the right to their own belief system? You know, I see nothing wrong with putting a mosque right next to a temple in a Christian church, that we should all be able to get along. Now, however, what if you were a small pastor and someone sent you a huge, well, just a small druid pagan symbol as a gift, and they say, could you please put it up on your altar for us? Would you do it? No. You'd say, listen, thank you for your gift, but it kind of is a bit hypocritical for me to put a pagan symbol right next to the Bible. But that's exactly what they do. And all we're doing is pointing it out. It's not criticism, it's just basically what is going on. If you're worshiping, look, I always said this, Pope, if you're worshiping a pagan god, just tell us. That's up to us, you know. That's fine to me. If you want to worship a pagan god, go right ahead. But don't do it deceptively and tell us you're a Christian when you do it. And if you're not, explain it. Explain these statues, where do they come from? But it's never done. Now, you'll read the article that the Pope just commented, and this was on the terrorism attack in France. And you're going to see the hypocrisy come right in the mainstream media yesterday. Now the media, now I'm going back to Tony's words, and these were some words that help put him in jail and will help keep him in jail unless there's some miracle. And the media, the press, and the propagandists always exalt Rome, he said, and it's an unscriptural religion. Now, there's nothing wrong with saying that. If it's unscriptural, it's unscriptural, right? And it is. And there isn't many Protestant ministers that if their push came to shove and they weren't, worried about their 501c3 money, would say the same exact thing. It's not a criticism. Just pointing out that Rome has traditions. The Bible has others. Now, in the Bible, God states he doesn't like these traditions. That is true. Now, you're going to see that what the Pope said today or yesterday regarding he doesn't want anybody criticizing religions anymore. I guess he's saying God shouldn't criticize unscriptural religions. So he's telling God what to do, basically. Well, the Bible, now Tony says in Daniel, says that this fourth and last secular kingdom of the world is the kingdom that Christ shall doom and destroy by his powerful word, preached in the Spirit by the members of his body. Now, I imagine people go to Daniel, and there could be other interpretations, but that's one I've heard many times. Now, it is that in this vain world system, and Tony will call it evil or Satan world's kingdom, verbally tears to pieces the testimony of God. And that's nothing, I think that's true. When you look at the Bible, now, I don't care if you're an agnostic or an atheist, and you put these two side by side, and you, as an agnostic and atheist, have your right to worship or not worship as well. You would see there is a difference between the traditions followed by Catholicism. Now, I was a Catholic, so I know them. And I'm saying, okay, folks, if you still believe, that's fine. But I can tell you there is a big difference between what's said in the Bible and how the Catholic religion functions. However, I'm stating that if people want to, if that's what they want to do, that's fine. But just know what your hierarchy is all about. That's all I'm saying. And realize that the hierarchy of the Roman Catholic Church is a city-state. It is not solely a religion. And I can point that out to you. Now, why should I point that out to you? Because I'm going to get back to Tony's words here. We're going to spend the whole hour talking about this. But let me give you just a refresher. The Vatican State is situated in Vatican Hill, on the right bank of the Tiber River, within the city of Rome. It's a country in itself, folks. It has a government. It states right here. I'm looking at its flag. The Pope has full legal, executive, and judicial powers over this government entity. So basically, he's not just a religious leader. Executive power over the area is in the hands of a commission of cardinals appointed by the Pope. College of Cardinals is the Pope's chief advisory body, and upon his death, the cardinals elect a successor. Now, there are many who say, you can read history, that the Vatican's favorite form of government is fascism. Oh, it probably is. But you know what? They have over 200 concordats in countries, whether they're fascist or democratic or whatever. They don't care. Now, what's this Vatican State? It's a sovereign and independent country, and it's the survival of the old papal states that in 1859 comprised an area of some 17,000 square miles. So they had a lot of power. They used to be a big country, right? During the struggle for Italian unification from 1860 to 1870, most of this area became part of Italy. By an Italian law of May 13, 1871, the temporal power of the Pope was abrogated, and the territory of the papacy was confined to the Vatican in lateral places in the village of Castel Gandolfo. So they said, listen, what do you want to do? You want to be a religion or do you want to be a country? Make up your mind. Oh, that didn't make the Vatican too happy. Now, the popes consistently refused to recognize this arrangement. Now, they had to get together with Mussolini in the Vatican Lateral Treaty of February 1929 between the Vatican and the Kingdom of Italy. Then they established the autonomy of the Holy See in this little area. Now, what is this country all about? And I used to walk by there and walk through it, well, at least on the outskirts in St. Peter's Square, sometimes inside to do a story or two. But the ruler right now, this is Francis. The land area is 0.17 square miles, nothing. Population, as of July 2014, was 842. Monetary unit is the euro. They use the euro. The national name is Stato. They have a name. Stato della Città del Vaticano. So that they have a country. Current government officials. Languages include Italian, Latin, French, and various other languages. Ethnicity of their country is Italian, Swiss, and other. What's other? Who knows? Religion, we know what that is. Labor force, 2,832. Oh, really? Why don't you say 20? What about the ones that work for them around the world that they don't count? And their budget, I love this. This is kind of like when you talk about cities, country, and cities, states, and the federal government not telling you really what they own and what they have, but giving you basically, this is what we collect from taxes and this is what we pay out, which is really an issue in America. That's not, they don't put into play that they own the Santa Monica Golf Course and all these different investments. And the Vatican says their budget is $308 million, expenditures $326 million. So they're spending more than they're making, and yet they can, they have assets in the world probably larger than any organization. How does that work? Oh, then they have communication, telephone lines, their own TV shows, CD, doc. I won't even get into the broadcasting point of there. And it says here in their website, international disputes, none. Oh, is that right? What country, what world are they living in? But anyway, that gives you just a bit of an idea of what we're talking about here. And back to Tony, what he's saying is he's looking at this and stating, look, what's the hypocrisy here? He's saying, what is this organization? And he knew that the government officials in our country were right in the pocket of them. And a former nun, he says, M. Frances Cusack, speaking of Rome and its world system in her book, The Black Pope, said this. He said, "What shall we say of a religious order which prides itself on being called by the name of Savior of mankind and yet has made the practice of untruth a fine art and reduced the practice of lying to a science?" And she adds in this book called The Black Pope by former nun M. Frances Cusack, "Some people may say that what I have just said should be objected to strongly. The question is not whether the words which we use are strong or feeble, but whether they are true or false." And M. Frances Cusack stated that she had literally wasted 30 years of her life in what she now deems to be an evil and wicked cult. Exactly what they call anyone who has a ministry that criticizes the Vatican. Isn't that really what goes on? Like she said, the Vatican, quote, has made the practice of untruth a fine art and reduced the practice of lying to a science. And I'm telling you what, living in Rome for 7 years and covering stories and watching this crazy organization unfold and watching how America has been under their influence since the beginning, learning that there, I have to agree with her. Now, we'll get back to more of Tony's words here that helped put him in jail. And mention this. I do want to get back to this article that the Pope was quoted in yesterday. And it had to do with the French terrorist attack on that publishing house that was, it was kind of like a National Lampoon magazine that criticized religions, Muslims, and criticized Muhammad, criticized, Jesus, the whole works. And then supposedly Muslim terrorists went in and killed these 12 people, including the publisher of the magazine, for that. Pope had some interesting comments. And let me tell you something. I recommend he go to not a fascist law school. I don't know, or maybe Rome Italy still has the Napoleonic system, guilty till proven innocent. Maybe he ought to go to an American law school, and if we ever did practice it right, he'd understand what he was saying today was completely hypocritical. Especially knowing that he's a ruler of a country, not really God on earth. So, we'll get to that in a minute. So, anyway, I want to get back to also some of Tony's statements that he made regarding some of the favorite lies that we've heard about in this country, and from his point of view, what happened. And get back to you right after these short messages.
You're listening to FirstAmendmentRadio.com worldwide. Freedom is never free. We need your support today at FirstAmendmentRadio.com.
The program you are listening to is 100% sponsored by you, the listener, on this First Amendment Rights Media channel. You will notice that there are few commercials on this radio network. There's a good reason for that. Corporate advertising dollars come with strings that limit program content. So without your help, these programs cannot continue on internet or our several affiliates. If you benefit by the educational law programs, we ask you to give. If you are admonished or nurtured by the Bible and ministry programs, we ask you to give. If some voice a cause that you are passionate about, we ask you to give. If you believe in any of these, we ask you to support them as you would a missionary on a continual basis, as if giving a tithe for missionary radio. These programs are not commercially viable and must be supported by those faithful to the cause of truth. Look for the button to sponsor your favorite programs at our listen and schedule pages on the internet. Then, when you subscribe, we will send you the last quarterly MP3 CD of that program immediately, and continue to do so with each new quarter. We will also give you unlimited archive access to all of our programs. We're asking you to give much less than a tithe, so that you may also send support directly to a particular program host, cause, and anywhere else the Spirit may lead you. Do all to the glory of our God and Creator, for His holy nation, the only kingdom that will last forever. Thank you for listening. Since the beginning of time, kings have sought it, nations have fought for it. It has been traded, it has been borrowed, it has been purchased, it has been stolen. There's a reason for it. To secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and to our posterity, invest with the security of gold and silver. Call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188 or visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net. Listen to Financial Survival with your host, Melody Cedarstrom, right here on FirstAmendmentRadio.com at 4 p.m. Eastern or 1 p.m. Pacific Time. Visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net or call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188. Toll free, 1-800-375-4188.
Okay, we're back on the Investigative Journal, and what Tony Alamo really was saying, and how I agree with him on this point, is that when Rome is a minority, for example, in a country like England, when they tried to blow up the Parliament and they were oppressed from practicing their religion there, although they were basically a temporal power, a city, country as well, they cry that there's no freedom of religion. And they use democratic countries like ours to get that message out. However, what Tony was saying, and what I totally agree and have said many times myself, is that when Rome is in power, then what they do is they try to limit freedom of religion through deceptive means. That's exactly what they do. And that's what they're doing. That's what they did with Tony Alamo. And that's what they did with many other cases. And that's why they are involved in fomenting wars, creating revolutions, including the American Revolution, the French Revolution, etc., including, I believe, having their hand in orchestrating this war on terror. And Tony said, here's several examples of some of the evildoers' favorite lies. He says, did the people of Jonestown all, in unison, really commit suicide by drinking poisonous Kool-Aid under the order of Jim Jones? Just because they were visited by a couple of government agents, as the propagandists, the news media, and the press told you? And most of you believe them, right? The answer is no. In Jonestown, the people who escaped told my late wife Susan and myself that it was the government agents who killed them. They said they poisoned their Kool-Aid. They saw them do it. I have no idea what the doctrine of Jim Jones was, but several of his followers said when they saw government agents killing their friends with bullets because they wouldn't drink the poisoned Kool-Aid, they decided to escape into the woods. Then some of them who escaped visited some churches, including ours, to tell us their story. They said that it was not suicide at all, and that the government agents, or the other people these agents brought with them, had laced the Kool-Aid with poison, then shot those who wouldn't drink it. Do you believe them? There was a genuine terror in their eyes when they recalled the things that they said that some of the people in the government had done to them, things the government media lied about. Now, when I said that the Vatican limits when they get power, and they do have power in this country now, they try to limit freedom of speech, they use these kind of tactics to do it. And they'll use the FBI, as we've seen even in the Tony Alamo case, when FBI undercover agents come out and said they were basically told to frame him. But yet when they came out to do that, they weren't allowed to testify at trial, and probably the FBI then would wipe him off the books like they do many times. You know, this guy never really did work for us. And Tony said, some of the people in the government and the media have lied about my church for years. That's how I know the things these people were telling us were the truth. They reported to us that there is no way in the world that anyone could hypnotize or brainwash 1,000 people at one time into committing suicide. Ted Sherrick told me on our telephone call the other day that he knew these things were fact, and stated that he got a tip from Hal Jacques, an independent news editor in Connecticut, and followed up on it. Ted Sherrick gave Mike Kerb the tape he recorded of witnesses saying they were in danger, they were being threatened. Larry Stammer, a religious writer, wanted to do a story on it. Now, Tony goes on to say, any pastor of any church will tell you that it's very hard to get even a few people in the church to diligently sweep the sidewalk or mow the lawn, let alone get them to agree to kill themselves, when they know very well their souls would spend eternity in hell if they did. No pastor of the Lord Jesus Christ would ever tell their congregation to do that. Religions and countries that have had a long history of doing such things include the Japanese with their suicide planes in World War II and their hara-kiri, which is based out of Rome. All idolaters, all those involved in witchcraft, and all those religions or countries which are part of Rome's one world cult do this. Some governments tell their people to take Sane pill if they get captured by their enemies. Now, he also mentions this. Did the Branch Davidians at Waco really do anything so horrible that they deserve to die under the orders of Janet Reno and President Clinton? The answer is no. We have tapes proving that these people were murdered by poisonous gas and by fire from the government tanks. Government troops used one of the Branch Davidians for target practice while he was climbing over a fence to be with his wife and children, who also were being shot at by an American soldier under orders from Janet Reno and Bill Clinton. Would you not climb a fence to go through hell or high water to get to your wife or children if you saw anyone killing them? Who else but what kind of person could do this? He says, I'm patriotic, but you know something? Who could do this? You know? And he asked this question, would Americans kill Christian Americans? They did. But he says, I don't consider them Americans. And he went on to, these are just a few things he talked about. But one of the interesting things about this is that, he also says, well, for a very fact, did Lee Harvey Oswald kill President Kennedy? No. Was Bobby Kennedy really shot by Sirhan Sirhan? I'm told that people who were present at the assassination said no. Ted Shark, a friend of mine from my old restaurant days in Hollywood, was closely related to President Kennedy and his brother Bobby. Ted was the one at the time who had asked me to do the promotion for the Democratic Party. Ted has spent 35 years researching and analyzing the death of President Kennedy's brother Bobby. He told me while he was on the phone March 11, 2003, that he had hundreds of documents to prove that Sirhan Sirhan attempted to kill Kennedy, but that not one bullet from Sirhan's gun entered Bobby Kennedy. Mr. Chirac told me that Bobby Kennedy was killed by his bodyguards who were standing behind Mr. Kennedy, and he said he can prove it. So we have stories and stories that go on, and he mentions the World Trade Center, Oklahoma City, and he says this, and let's we've talked about the World Trade Center in Oklahoma City many times, and that he said hundreds of witnesses say that the government agents were not only involved, they placed several other bombs in the buildings as well. These witnesses say it would have been impossible for the federal building in Oklahoma City and the World Trade Center to collapse as they did without there being many other bombs in the building. And we can go on, and he was outspoken on these subjects as well. So, the one thing that when you start putting things together, folks, and you start understanding the Vatican's role in much of this stuff, then you start to begin to say, well, what are they, a religion or a country? And do you have a right to criticize them or to talk about these deviants? Of course you do. Like I said, we're not speaking here about, their right to say Mass on Sunday or to worship God in the way they choose. But we're talking about how they use this as a cover for really who they are. And I tried to tell you the Vatican City, what it is there, really how it was formed and what really it is. And we've done many, many shows about the concordats, the legal agreements they have, over 200 with countries all over the world. And you can bet we talked about the money laundering that goes on at the Vatican Bank, and just recently did a story regarding the huge scandals involving billions of dollars that have been built, but they only make $300 million, and they spend $326 million a year. Well, apparently the U.S. courts agree, because every time that they're sued here in this country, they just say, well, they don't do business here. And you don't think the courts protect them? Ask Sherman Skolnick, former researcher from Chicago. He spent his life researching this very subject. And I'm telling you something, if you go to Skolnick.com, Skolnick, you'll read some things that are amazing. Stories that really show you the Vatican financial connections to banks all around the world. Now, let's see, we got a few minutes here, and this is really appropriate, I think, today. Because we're talking about freedom of speech, we're talking about Tony Alamo being jailed for really charges that were trumped up, and basically because of his criticism of this country, of the ruler of the country, the Pope, and their connections to our high-level officials in America, as well as their orchestrating of wars, and nonetheless the war on terrorism today. So let's see what the Pope has to say regarding this attack in France. And it's very interesting because he says Pope Francis said there are limits to freedom of speech, especially when it insults or ridicules someone's faith. Now, he said this in comments that the Vatican later said Friday did not mean justifying the attack on the satirical French magazine Charles Hebdo. All right, the Pope is correct in stating there are limits to freedom of speech. Now, the question on those limits is, what is the reaction? What is tolerated as a reaction to someone? Let's say somebody does, let's say you're walking down the street and someone walks up to you and criticizes you reading a Bible. And he criticizes you and said, "You stupid Bible believer." Now, what? All right. That ain't the kindest thing to say to somebody, and probably the guy that said it's a bit of an idiot. But what is your reaction to that? What are you allowed to by the law? Are you allowed to punch him? According to Pope Francis, maybe so, which is crazy. No, you're not. And is self-defense, and that's really what we're talking about here, is that a justifiable defense for hitting this guy if he criticizes you about reading the Bible? No, you'd be charged with assault, or if you hit him and you killed him, with murder. Because just a criticism of your faith doesn't justify you. You were not placed in a situation of peril or harm of your physical body because of his insults. But Pope Francis doesn't really understand the law, and I believe he's using it to justify these attacks, even though he says he's not. And that's typical of the Vatican. Now, Francis spoke about the Paris attacks while en route to the Philippines on Thursday, defending free speech. Now, see, they defend it, but yet he will do something interesting in this article. And this is why the double talk of the Vatican is so dangerous. And this is why Tony Alamo sits in jail right now, because he understood it. And that's why there's pastors out there right now that are preaching the same thing, that, better watch out, because these guys play for keeps. Now, but he said that it's a fundamental right, but a duty to speak one's mind for the sake of the common good. Now, what the hell is that? But he said there were limits. By an example. Now, listen to this example he used. Now, if he I'm used to this kind of teaching, because in law school you do this all the time. By the way, he referred to Alberto Gaspari, who organizes papal trips and was standing by his side aboard the papal plane. Now, the Pope said this: if my good friend Dr. Gaspari says a curse word against my mother, he can expect a punch. Francis said half jokingly, but was he joking? Throwing a mock punch his way. It's normal. You cannot provoke. You cannot insult the faith of others. You cannot make fun of faiths of others. Now, here's the point. According to, and this is true, according to, our First Amendment rights in America, you can joke about the religions of other people. Comedians do it all the time. You can insult people. Well, ask Don Rickles about the faith of others. How many times do Jews get insulted? How many times do Christians? We all do that. But does that require you throwing a punch? Now, let's say the Pope right there, let's say Mr. Gaspari said, a curse word against the Pope's mother, and he punched him. He could be charged with assault and put in jail. It's that simple, and tried for that crime. If he went farther and knifed him, he could be tried for attempted murder if he didn't die. And if he did kill him for that, he could be charged with murder, because it does not justify self-defense in what he said. Now, if Mr. Gaspari said a curse word and came after him with a knife, maybe then he's justified with using that same force in return. Now, if Mr. Gaspari said that same word and came to punch him, then he would be justifying punching back, using the same force to protect himself that's being used against him. However, let's say Mr. Gaspari came towards the Pope with a punch and the Pope shot him, then maybe he overstepped his bounds and he could have protected himself in another way. Now, that depends on a few things that are a little bit more complicated, but in no way should the Pope ever state that it's okay to punch somebody just because they said something against your mother or against your faith, etc. Now, in a sense, what he's doing is, is kind of in a sly way justifying what happened in France. Or maybe stating this: hey, if you criticize us, the Vatican, we can do a whole hell of a lot of things to you. See, you should keep your mouth shut, Mr. Tony Alamo. You should keep your mouth shut, all you other pastors who ever want to criticize anybody's religion. But at the same time, this same group will do it through deceptive means. They have at their hands money, power, the feds, they have CIA, they have everybody on their hands to do their dirty work in many different ways than just going out and crying wolf. Now, so you can see how these people operate. I think this is interesting. Now, once they do this, they got to come back and say, no, he didn't really mean that. So, but what did he mean? He said, his pretend punch aside, Francis by no means said the violent attack on Hebrew was justified. Of course he can't say that. Yeah. Quite the opposite. He said such horrific violence in God's name couldn't be justified and was an aberration. Now see what I mean? On one hand, he's provoking, and then on the other hand, he's saying God wouldn't do it. I mean, what does he really mean? He doesn't know what he's... And I know it sounds kind of weird, but man, can't you see the hypocrisy here? But he did say this. He said such horrific violence in God's name couldn't be justified and was an aberration. But he said a reaction of some sort was to be expected. Oh, really? The Reverend Thomas Rosica, who collaborates with the Vatican Press Office, issued a statement early Friday stressing that the Pope was by no means justifying the attack of Hebdo. Pope Francis, he said, has not advocated violence with his words on the fight. Now, what was he advocating? Okay, it's okay to punch people if they say something bad about your mother? Or your faith? Now that to me is advocating violence. He's saying it's expected. And how many people are going to say, yeah, the Pope said it was okay to hit? Now, I walk down the street, you know, you've heard that joke about your mama. You always hear it in the black neighborhoods and stuff. So, I mean, someday somebody's going to hit somebody and say, hey, the Pope said it's okay. Or I'm going to say, boy, you know, that's a crazy religion. You know, I mean, they believe in flying saucers. Oh, the Pope said it's okay to punch you. Okay. He said Pope Francis' words were spoken in a friendly, intimate manner among colleagues and friends on a journey. Oh my goodness. He noted that Francis has spoken out clearly against the Paris attacks and that violence in God's name can never be justified. Oh, but it's okay to punch somebody, right? Recently, the Vatican and 4 prominent French imams issued a joint declaration that, while denouncing the Paris attack, urged the media to treat religions with respect. Well, you know, that sounds good. But my point is, why don't they, the Vatican, treat others with respect? They don't do it. And there's facts throughout the course of history that show it. And this is like, you know, for someone like that to say that, knowing the history of his organization and what they're involved in today, is the pot calling the kettle black. And he went on to state that, you know, he's not worried if he's God's protecting him, the whole works. But in a sense, I think it was really important how they use this article shows you the hypocrisy involving the highest leader, not of only, he claims to be a leader of a religion, but his first interest is worldly affairs. And you don't have to go any farther than to sit in Rome and watch the way they operate to understand that. And you don't have to go any farther. Go to VaticanConcordates.com to see what they're really about with these 200 concordates around the world. Probably more. And why don't you ask them while you're at it, their involvement in the assassination of Abraham Lincoln and several other presidents. And let's see what they say then about this idea of freedom of speech, about not attacking other countries or their religions. Let's see what they say there. Because they've been doing it for thousands of years. And then they come out now because they have power to say, you can't do that to us. And that's how they operate. Tony Alamo knew it, tried to tell you, and they put him in jail. for 175 years. While priests who get really nailed for these pedophilia acts, they get sent to a hospice or a halfway house where they can play golf. We've talked about that. Guys that have been involved in murder raps, in financial fraud, heads of the Vatican Bank, they're not prosecuted. No, they're sent to, in case of Father Marcinkus, Archbishop Marcinkus, he was sent for 20 to 30 years to live in Phoenix, Arizona, where he lived in a $400,000 mansion. Golf every day, that's how they get treated. But if you criticize this organization here, this city-state of the Vatican, boy, you're going to spend 175 years in jail. So I'd think twice before, the media, before you convict this man, until you start really looking into the facts. And that's why I'm doing the story, just so that you get an opportunity to hear the other side of the story, as Paul Harvey would say. Well, listen, we're all out of time. I'll be back Monday. Have a good weekend. And hopefully it'll be a safe, healthy, and prosperous weekend. And no one is going to punch you for criticizing anybody's religion. Good night, and see you Monday.